When I married Lucas, I thought love could soften anything, even the chill that lived behind his mother's perfect smile. I believed if I was patient enough, kind enough, I could melt the frost that seemed to follow her every word. But there are people, I learned, who guard their superiority like treasure, and no amount of warmth can reach them. The first time I met Helen Graham, she greeted me with the kind of politeness that felt like a performance. Her house smelled of lilies and lemon polish, everything in its place, nothing left to chance. She took one look at me, my thrifted dress, my nervous smile, and said, "You have a sweet face, Nora." Lucas always had a soft spot for simplicity. Her tone was calm, but her eyes said everything she didn't. Lucas chuckled, trying to lighten the air. "Mom," he said gently, "you make it sound like I brought home a schoolgirl." "Oh, darling, I only meant she's unpretentious," she replied, turning her teacup so the light hit the gold rim just right. I laughed politely, as if I hadn't heard the echo of her meaning. That day, as I left her house, I told myself she'd warm up eventually. That once she saw how much I loved her son, things would change. But they didn't. After our wedding, Helen offered to stay with us for a little while, saying she wanted to help us settle into married life. Her presence filled every corner of the house, the scent of her perfume, the sound of her disapproval, the shadow of her judgment. She never raised her voice, never used cruel words, not directly. Her weapon was elegance, her tone, her timing, her restraint. "The curtains are charming," she'd say, glancing around the living room. "They remind me of my grandmother's house. Very rustic. Or, Lucas used to love a proper roast dinner, but I'm sure your cooking will grow on him eventually." It was death by 1,000 courtesies. I tried everything, cooking her favorite meals, asking for her advice, listening to her stories about when Lucas was a boy. But nothing seemed to earn even a fraction of approval. Her smile stayed the same, pleasant but hollow. One afternoon, while folding laundry, I overheard her speaking on the phone in the next room. Her voice carried clearly down the hallway. "Oh, she's pleasant enough," Helen said to someone. "But Lucas could have done better. You can tell she married above her worth." For a moment, I stood frozen, holding one of Lucas's shirts in my hands. It was such a simple sentence, but it cracked something deep inside me. When she noticed me standing there, she didn't flinch. She just gave me that same measured smile. "Oh, Nora," she said lightly. "You shouldn't eavesdrop, dear, but really, you mustn't take things so personally. I'm simply realistic." That night, I didn't sleep much. Lucas noticed my silence and asked what was wrong. When I told him, he sighed. "She's just old-fashioned," he said softly. "She doesn't mean harm. Please don't let her words hurt you." I wanted to ask him how could they not, but I said nothing, because arguing would only make me the problem. So I stopped trying to win her over. I stopped measuring my worth through her eyes. I started working quietly on myself for myself. I'd always loved creating, sketching, sewing, designing little pieces that told stories through texture and color. So while Helen watched her late night shows, I began sitting at the dining table with my sketchbook. It started as therapy, an escape from the smallness I felt. But soon, it turned into something more. When she noticed me one evening, she raised an eyebrow. "Sketching?" she asked, sipping her tea. "That's adorable, dear. A nice little pastime for when you're done with housework." I smiled and said nothing. But inside, I promised myself something. That one day, she would see the life I built with her own eyes and know that she was wrong about me. Months passed. I began getting small commissions from local shops, then boutique orders. My design, simple but heartfelt, started circulating quietly through the town. Each creation was a little piece of me, calm, enduring, patient. When Lucas realized how far it had grown, he was stunned. "Nora, he said, holding up his phone. One morning. Did you know that article mentions you? The local magazine, they called your work understated elegance. And for the first time in a long time, I felt seen. Helen looked up from her paper, pretending not to care. But I caught the flicker in her eyes' surprise, maybe even a touch of disbelief. She didn't say anything, but the silence that followed felt different. Heavier. That was the moment I realized. Time doesn't just reveal the truth. It restores dignity to those who were patient enough to wait. The shift came slowly, not with grand gestures or apologies, but in the quiet pauses between Helen's words. She still offered advice, still maintained her careful elegance, but her sentences no longer carried the same sharp edges. The woman who once looked at me like an unwelcome guest now watched me with something almost resembling curiosity. It started the morning Lucas left for a work trip. I had an upcoming client meeting and was rushing to finish a few last-minute designs when Helen appeared in the doorway. "You've been up since dawn," she said, her tone unusually neutral. "You should take a break." I glanced up from my sketch pad. Her expression was unreadable, but softer somehow. "I'm fine," I said with a smile. "This is the good kind of tired." For a long time, she said nothing. Then she walked over and picked up one of my fabric samples, a muted cream pattern embroidered with pale gold threads. "You made this?" "I did." Her thumb brushed the stitching gently. "It's delicate," she murmured, "and precise." Coming from Helen, those words were as close to a compliment as I'd ever get. Weeks turned into months, and my business continued to grow. I was featured in another magazine, then invited to showcase a small collection at a local exhibition. I remember standing backstage that evening, adjusting one of my model's dresses, when I saw Helen walking through the crowd. Lucas had invited her without telling me. For a moment, my heart sank. I wasn't sure I could handle her judgment again. Not there, not on my night. But when our eyes met, something unexpected happened. She smiled. Not her usual polished smile, but a small, uncertain one. The kind people give when they realize they might have misjudged someone. After the show, she approached me quietly. "You did well tonight," she said. Her voice was soft, almost fragile. "Your designs are elegant." "Thank you," I said, trying not to let the tears rise too quickly. Then she added, "Lucas always said you had a quiet determination. I see it now." That night, as I stood in our kitchen removing my earrings, I realized how strange forgiveness can be. It doesn't come wrapped in apology or regret. Sometimes, it arrives in small, hesitant acknowledgments, fragile and unspoken. Life began to find its balance. Helen didn't transform overnight, but she changed in ways that mattered. She started asking questions about my work, cautious at first, then genuinely interested. I'd catch her touching my fabrics when she thought I wasn't looking, her fingertips trailing lightly across the threads. One afternoon, while we were having tea together, she said something I'll never forget. "You know," she began, staring into her cup, "when you first married Lucas, I thought you'd be a phase. I assumed you'd grow tired of this life, that you'd fade into comfort." She looked up, her eyes tired but honest. "But you didn't. You built something. You proved me wrong." I didn't know what to say. For a moment, I simply sat there, holding the warmth of my teacup and the weight of her words. "I never wanted to prove you wrong," I finally said quietly. "I just wanted to live peacefully, to be good to your son, and to build something meaningful." Helen smiled faintly, the kind of smile that comes when pride finally makes space for humility. "Then you've done both, Nora." The conversation drifted to other things after that: her garden, Lucas's work, small talk that felt strangely comforting. But something had shifted permanently between us. The air felt lighter, and for the first time in years, I felt at home in my own house. Months later, when Helen's health began to falter, I was the one who sat beside her hospital bed. She'd grown fragile, her voice thinner, but her presence still carried the grace she never lost. One evening, as the room dimmed with sunset light, she reached for my hand. "I used to think people's worth was measured by how much they had," she said softly. "The right clothes, the right manners, the right name. But watching you—" She paused, her eyes glassy. "You taught me that worth has nothing to do with any of that. It's about what you build when no one believes in you." I felt my throat tighten. "You didn't have to say that." "Yes, I did," she whispered. "Because you deserve to hear it." When she passed a few months later, I found a letter tucked inside her jewelry box addressed to me. Inside, written in her neat slanted handwriting, were words that made my chest ache. "You married above your worth," I once said. "I see now how wrong I was. It was my son who was lucky. Thank you for loving him, for loving me, even when I didn't deserve it. Helen." I cried that night, not for the years lost, but for the grace that finally found its way between us. Years later, when my designs became part of a national showcase, I brought one of her old brooches with me, a small silver pin she used to wear on her scarves. I fastened it to my collar before stepping onto the stage. As the applause filled the hall, I thought about her voice, her sharpness, her eventual gentleness. How time didn't erase what she'd done, but softened it, turned it into something that taught me about patience, dignity, and quiet strength. Some people look for revenge when they're wronged, but sometimes the best revenge is the life you build in silence, the life that speaks for itself. And that's what I did. Time didn't just prove Helen wrong. It proved me right about love, about grace, and about the quiet power of becoming everything someone said you could never be.